Prieks jūs visus redzēt. Prieks redzēt Ričardu. Šodien pie mums viesojas diplomāts no Amerikas. Kā redzat, arī mums fonā ir skaista grāmata America. Un vārdā Ričards Damstra. Is that the right pronunciation? Yeah. ASV vēstniecības Public Affairs Officer, jeb latviski sakot, preses un kultūras nodaļas vadītājs. Kā tev sokas? Kā tev iet, Ričard?
Ļoti labi, paldies par ielēgumu šodien.
Ļoti liels prieks, ka tu šodien atnāci pie mums viesos. Te jau 3 gadus Ričards ar savu bulgāru izcelsmes dzīves biedru Ivo ir bāzēti Latvijā, un šovasar tava misija Latvijā arī noslēgsies. Par laimi vai diemžēl? To tu vēl pastāstīsi. Vēlos tev uzreiz pajautāt, kas ir līdz šim bijusi tava mīļākā atmiņa dzīvojot Latvijā?
Mums ir daudz atmiņu, bet mums patīk svinot Jāņu svētkus šeit. Mums bija laukos, bija visas tradīcijas, es lecu pāri ugunī. Man patīk. Un man arī patīk festivāls Lampa, tāpēc ka mums nav kaut kāds līdzīgs ASV. Amerikā ir, what are the festivals called in the States, the big ones? Like the music festivals, South by Southwest, and there's a bunch of them.
And here we have Lampa.
You have Lampa. And it's smart people getting together to talk, and it's fun. And I'm looking forward to going back in June.
Very good. Lai arī Ričards ir apguvis latviešu valodas pamatus, lai saruna būtu plūstoša, mēs šodien pārslēgsimies uz angļu valodu. Un pašu sarunu strukturēsim 2 daļās. Pirmajā daļā izspriedīsim to, kāds tu esi tavu vīru stāstu, proti, kur tu iedaries LGBT plus alfabētā. Un tad otrajā daļā kaut kā pāriesim uz to, kā Amerikas ārpolitikā attiecas uz LGBT plus jautājumiem un ar kādiem instrumentiem tieši ASV vēstniecība un arī tu kā diplomāts iedzīvinat konkrētās vadlīnijas Latvijā. Does that sound good?
That sounds good.
Very well. Richard, the first question, of course, I want to ask about you is about you.
Thank you.
And generally, would you say that you've seen the world as a diplomat?
Well, I've seen a big part of the world, and I think the best part of it is been able to live for longer periods of time in different places. So you get a real feel and sense of the different cultures. I don't like to travel a lot, but I like to be other places and live abroad, and I'm very happy I've had a chance to do that.
And so far, which have been the touch points?
First assignment was in Kazakhstan, and then I lived in Ukraine, and then I lived in Bulgaria, and then I worked in Washington for a couple of years, then I moved to Hungary, and now I'm in Latvia.
What a trajectory. It's like going from most homophobic to sort of the least, but yeah.
Yes, something of a scale, yes.
But where did it all start? Before you got the chances to travel, who's Richard? Who are you?
Well, my story.
Yeah.
Yes. So I am from the city of Grand Rapids, which is in West Michigan. And this is, when you're from Michigan, the state is shaped like a hand for those of you who know Michigan. So whenever we're explaining where we're from, we hold up our hand and explain where we're from. So Grand Rapids is on the southwest Michigan side. Detroit's over here, Grand Rapids.
So it's closer to Chicago.
Yes. It's about a 3-hour drive to Chicago, and we go to Chicago often for culture and going to the big city things. So Grand Rapids, though, it's a pretty conservative town, very Republican, lots of Christian influence, lots of evangelical churches. Grew up in that environment. Very normal, happy childhood, just very, I think, very conservative and relatively sheltered childhood. And so that, of course, had a big impact on me and the whole process of at first hating myself and then eventually accepting myself as a gay man. And I'm sure this story is not new to a lot of people in your audience, but that was, kind of the foundation or the beginning of that journey, and that's the starting point of that journey.
What was the turning point? Like, I know you told me that like religion had quite a big aspect in your life as well. I can imagine that it took a while for you to get out of that denial. And how was that?
Yes, it did. And I grew up as a Christian. My family is Christian. I would still consider myself a Christian. And it's something that I took very seriously when I was young. And the predominant element of the faith in a lot of American culture, but especially in West Michigan, it's the evangelical variety of Christianity, which is very clear in its stance against gay people, and that homosexuality is a sin and you will be condemned to hell if you don't choose a different path or turn away from that. And so that's something that was just sort of infused in my brain, in my life growing up. And so it really took me a long time to eventually learn that there are other ways to interpret the faith, and to find other people who don't think that way, and to realize the world is much bigger and there are different and I think broader ways to interpret the Bible and to interpret what people believe these commands are. And I went through that process over the course of many, many years. But it was sort of driven by this fundamental feeling inside of me that I couldn't live with this idea that I'm a mistake, that God created me and that I'm a mistake. And I eventually discovered that a lot of people feel that way and think that way, and that I'm now quite comfortable saying that I'm part of God's design and part of His creation, and He made me this way for reasons. I might not understand all the reasons, but I think that's part of how He created humanity.
I know in Latvia there are a couple of mostly Baptist churches that are like inclusive, that are led by queer individuals as well. For you, as someone who has to travel for work a lot, do you like still actively like look after your faith? How is it in Latvia? Do you like attend like services or?
No, I don't. And to be honest, I haven't really explored what the options are here, particularly in sort of the English-speaking world. My experience with the English-speaking churches overseas in other countries have been that they tend to be quite conservative and evangelical. Right. And so I did attend these kinds of churches, the international churches in Kazakhstan and Ukraine. And I tried it a little bit in Bulgaria, but just by that point in my journey, I didn't want to pretend to be someone else or to pretend that I could sit and agree with the kind of messages that they were preaching. And so when I'm in Washington, there's a church that I would attend sometimes that is far more welcoming to the LGBTQI community, and would attend that. But it's been now some time before I've really wanted to affiliate with a church.
Mm-hmm. Sort of, if we look at the US, like church and religion generally has a very prominent role in the discourse of like queer rights and LGBTQ issues. Do you think it's comparable to how religion shapes society in Latvia as well?
I think it's different. It feels different to me. And I think the arguments are a little bit different. In the United States, and again, I'm speaking in a very broad sense, but the most visible, sort of loudest, most influential elements of the Christian faith are very conservative, and over the years have become very, very political. And they've adopted political positions that essentially make them a subsidiary of the Republican Party. And so they've become very aggressive in anti-LGBT stance and a lot of other things that I don't think is Christ-like. But this has because a lot of Americans as a starting point are Christian, this has had a significant influence and still does influence our politics and our culture. The church plays a very significant role in our political life. Mm. And I don't feel it's the same in Latvia. I think people don't necessarily connect their faith to a political agenda in the same way that many Americans do, and it doesn't sort of drive their social and cultural decisions the way it does for a lot of Americans. It's more of a, I guess, quieter historical faith as opposed to an active political movement like it's become in the United States.
And for you personally, correct me if I'm wrong, but like internalized fears and internalized homophobia, what were the triggering turning points when you realized that you already mentioned that you can live your life differently?
Well, a big part of it was moving away from my hometown when I got accepted to become a diplomat. It was my first time really living away from that home environment. And, when you're in your home environment your whole life, you have this identity. Everybody knows you a certain way, and you feel a little bit trapped because you don't want to lose your friends and your family. Right. And, but when you are in a different environment and you're meeting new people and you have a chance to be more of yourself, it's a little bit freeing in a way to have that distance from your roots. And so that really started the process for me. And over the course of time and moving away and getting comfortable with my new colleagues and the new State Department institution, eventually became much more comfortable with who I am and living out.
To get into diplomatic service, did you have to study like politics or law?
No, it's not required to study any particular thing in our system. There's a test that you have to pass about all different history, culture, politics, world events, geography, mathematics, all sorts of things. And then if you pass the test, you're invited to an interview process where you have both an individual interview and then you kind of have this group interview where the testers sit in the corner and watch how you interact with other candidates. And then if you pass that, there's security and medical clearances, so it's a very long, competitive process.
Yeah, why I ask the question, because like in Latvia specifically, within the education system, in high school, primary school, you can't really talk about those things. Teachers have to self-censor them thanks to the infamous likumības likumi. And then university is usually the turning point for a lot of people. And moving to Riga. Yeah, you also mentioned like moving
away. And you moved to United States for a time. I mean, how did that have an impact on your journey?
Well, I'm a staunch advocate for people finding their opportunities to live in the States as well. I'll have a question for you about that in the end, but it was eye-opening. Like the first day on campus, we had like the tour around the campus, and like there were like huge rainbow flags out. I was shocked. I took pictures and sent them to my mom, and mom is like, "Oh boy." But no, she has also come full circle, and she loves Frankie, my partner, more than me.
It's funny how that works. Yes. Yeah, I get the same feeling sometimes when my husband is at home with me.
Oh,
yes.
What made you decide to become a diplomat?
I'm part of a generation that after September 11 happened, a lot of us sort of started thinking very seriously about, what can I do to serve our country, to serve our alliance, to kind of try to improve our relationship with the rest of the world. And some people chose military service, some people chose other government type service, and I thought diplomatic service would be a good fit for me and my interests.
And how has it been? How is it like, not generally how is it being a diplomat, but how is it being a gay diplomat?
Well, I think for the most part, it's pretty good, at least in our system. There's some right. challenges, and I also have to preface everything that I say. I know that we as diplomats, when we're living in another country, we live in somewhat of a bubble. We have our community of other diplomats and expats, and then a lot of the people that we work with in the countries where we're living. They tend to be more, well-traveled, or people that are not, are used to being around people who are different than them. And so being a gay person is not a big deal. And I also have this idea that, I'm a little bit insulated from the local laws and local customs. And so I know that we live in a bubble. And it's not maybe the same for a lot of people in your audience who don't have that same kind of dynamic for them. But in general, especially in our U.S. State Department, it's really come a long way. in terms of treating us equally and giving us the sort of protections and support that we need to work as LGBTQI diplomats. We have an organization within the State Department that advocates for us and makes sure that new policies or policy changes aren't going to have a negative impact on us. 30 years ago, you could be fired from the federal government if the security found out that you were gay, because you were considered a security risk, either because you're less stable, gay people are less stable, or
true.
In some cases, maybe, but also this idea that you could be blackmailed. The KGB could, take photos of you with a man and then blackmail you to give away secrets and things. And so there was this.
Were there any cases where it was that's just like allegation based?
I'm sure there probably were cases of that, but also, they should be treated on a case by case basis and not make this blanket assumption that a gay diplomat is somehow a bigger security risk than a straight diplomat.
Yeah,
straight diplomat could have an affair with a woman and be blackmailed. It's faulty logic.
So 30 years ago, when you applied, not you applied, but if someone applied, they had to disclose their sexuality?
No, people kept it a secret back then because they would be fired if someone found out. But then people do find out, or somebody tells about them, and then there's an investigation, and then they get fired.
Gotcha.
But enough people finally stood up and said, "This is not fair. This is unjust." And you're kicking out talented people for no good reason. And so under President Clinton at the time, he passed an executive order that forbid firing from the federal government just on that basis.
Right.
And then over time, they continued to lobby for other protections against discrimination and employment decisions and things like this. And the State Department and our diplomatic corps in general developed a pretty good reputation for supporting LGBTQI people.
State Department, that's like equivalent of the Foreign Affairs Ministry?
Yes, exactly. That's what we call our foreign ministry.
Gotcha. Like the story about people just protesting reminds me of in Sweden when being gay was still considered an illness. Mm-hmm. People just would not go to work because they're sick.
Can never work again. I'm permanently ill. Yeah.
And that also triggered some changes because capitalism.
Yes, it's not good for your economy to discriminate against people on something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Tell that to Latvian politicians.
Yes, well, it's your job as a Latvian to tell that to Latvian politicians. So,
very that. Are there any other challenges currently regards the State Department ensuring that the environment internally is inclusive and the diversity is ensured?
Yeah, so it's something that I think in any institution you have to sort of constantly be vigilant and ensure that you're advocating for your interests and for your rights. And then there are current issues that we're still working on. One issue that's on the radar screen of our advocacy organization is ensuring protections and healthcare access for our trans colleagues to make sure that, especially when they're overseas, but through our insurance plans, things like that they can get appropriate healthcare for their needs that they have. Another issue is accreditation. There's a lot of countries around the world that don't recognize same-sex marriages. And so if I wanted to work there as a diplomat, I would not be, my spouse would not be able to get, diplomatic status and come with me to that post.
Mm-hmm. Whenever foreigners ask me, how's the situation regards LGBTQIA rights in Latvia, I usually try to pinpoint a similar timestamp in their own country's timeline. For instance, when friends from the US ask me, what's the situation there? I usually say that Latvia is somewhere where the US was in early 2000s. Would that be a correct assumption?
I think maybe in a general sense, but I think it's hard to make an exact comparison. But in the sense that
also the U.S. is huge.
Yeah, it's big, and there's a lot of differences between states and cities and things like that. But the mid to late 2000s,
Texas.
Yeah, well, that's when states were really sort of the tide was turning in terms of gay marriage becoming legal. And so a number of states were on a roll in terms of legalizing it, and the public opinion in general, really there was a critical mass majority of Americans ready to say they have no problem with gay marriage. And then in 2015, we had the Supreme Court decision that legalized it everywhere. And so in the sense of, marriage rights, so that if you want to make that comparison to Latvia, that would put it back into that time period comparing to the U.S. Mm-hmm. And so there's other, there's all sorts of differences and variations in the United States. And I would say even today, there's sort of new challenges coming up. There's the Human Rights Campaign, which is our big NGO for gay rights in the U.S., or one of them. Mm-hmm. They said last month that there's some 340 now anti-LGBT bills under consideration in different state legislatures across the United States. Now, most of these will never pass or never become law, but some will. And most of them are targeted at trans individuals and especially youth. A lot of them, there's Tennessee just passed a law restricting drag performances. And there's kind of this there's a little bit of a backlash now that we're seeing, which is really wrapped up in politics and Republican Party wanting to use these issues as a wedge issue to sort of energize their supporters. And it's unfortunate because I think as a whole, the U.S. has gotten past a lot of that, but there's still lots of work to do.
In 2023, banning drag performances, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
RuPaul has been here since 1800s. And
Yes.
But yeah, you mentioned that although the majority of those anti-queer laws will not be passed, they probably influence the things that you can hate about, that you can openly hate on, sort of, what is it called? Shifting the overtone window that's scary. I know in Latvia also there are many loopholes that conservative politicians and parties are not aware of, specifically looking at, as you also mentioned, for trans individuals that they can use to live their lives better. And I'm scared that seeing what's happening in the U.S., with the U.S. usually being the trailblazer with change, whether it be good or bad,
or worse, yes.
The same might happen in Latvia sooner or later. With that in mind, situation could be worse, but I think socially, at least in Latvia, has gotten better over the past 3 years. You mentioned the word momentum. Since you being stationed here, what has the momentum been building to? What have been the main points over the past 3 years that you've seen the change?
Yeah. And again, I've only been here for 3 years, but I do feel a sense of momentum because we meet a lot with Mosaica and other activists, and we follow this issue very closely in the embassy. And for me personally, it's part of our social life here with my husband. And so we participate in a lot of the events. And I do feel a sense of momentum. There's been, the Constitutional Court decision, the sort of progress, it goes up and down, but there's been definitely a level of progress in terms of legislative action in your parliament. And I think that's energized people, and people can feel that we're getting closer to something. And comparing the activist community and the advocate community here in Latvia to some of the other countries I've lived, they're really at a state of pretty good political, legal sophistication. And I think that's really going to pay off as the momentum continues over time. And you probably have been to prides here much earlier than I have, earlier in times. But now when you go to the Pride event, there's a huge level of energy. There's a lot of straight allies that come to participate. There are businesses supporting it. There are politicians openly supporting it and attending. And cultural figures, musicians, artists, and it's getting to this point of sort of critical mass in the culture, I feel, where it is going to produce ultimately legal changes that benefit the community here.
Recently, Mosaica did a survey in collaboration with dažādas, the official survey company, about perceptions of the queer community, and for the first time ever, more people view gay people or queer people. I don't remember if it was like only gays or like the whole community more favorably than less. So that's a shift. That has to mean something.
No, that's encouraging. Yeah. What do you feel? You live here. You've been here longer.
I moved to the States in 2018. Lived there for a year and a half. But during that time period, something had happened because I remember being there wasn't much on the media in a positive light in like 2017, 2018. The day I came back to Latvia in summer of 2019, fall of 2019, I went home to Circiņi, to my mom and dad's house. We were watching the news on LTV1, the sort of BBC of Latvia. There were some news about the same-sex partnership law, probably, and it didn't feel like anyone was bashing on it. And then later in the evening, we were watching X Factor, and then there was a queer artist. No, there was not a queer artist. There was a best friend of a queer artist who killed himself. And the judges were like crying, and I'm like, what is this positive representation? Of course, the person died, but like still the perception was like good. And I felt warmth because I had never felt that before. And ever since, like each year, something better has been happening. Then came the court rulings, first legal families. Now we're almost 40 legal families, whatever that entails at this point, because there is no law describing what a family is. But yeah.
Would you say it's scandalous to see a gay character in a Latvian movie or TV production, or is it now just becoming sort of routine? I don't watch that much Latvian TV. I remember watching the soap opera Ugunsgrēks, which was the biggest thing in like mid-2000s, and there was a gay character, but it was more of a caricature. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, the actress who portrayed a bisexual girl in the Neona Pavasaris movie has like blown up. Yeah, I heard about this.
And the movie is probably like... Movies in Latvia don't make that much money, but that movie is popular now, even though it came out like a year ago. But and that's seeing people fume, but also seeing people that are very, very supportive makes me really happy. I used to get triggered when I saw like negative comments on Facebook, but now I like get happy because I know that it's hurting you homophobe. I love to see that. And I also, this is a detour, but I used to engage in like also commenting snappy things out of like internal pain, probably, with all the buildup and whatnot. And then I realized that that's something sad people do.
Yes, I'd agree. And I try never to read the comments anymore.
Yeah, as a diplomat, you probably can't.
No, well, and I can't respond the way I'd want to. But,
talking about diplomats, it is no secret that there are like mostly like embassies from Western countries, including the US, that are quite prominent, specifically in Latvia and probably elsewhere, in pushing and doing a lot of things for LGBTQIA justice and equality. Why is that? Why the embassies?
Well, and I'll speak for American foreign policy, but I think it's probably for similar reasons, having, talking with colleagues in other embassies. But for us, it's part of our foreign policy for two reasons. First, it's a human rights issue, and I think it's really over the years become firmly established as a human rights issue. And so that we want to make it part of our foreign policy and part of our advocacy in trying to improve the situation globally. And then the other issue, which I think is especially pertinent in NATO countries, is we view it as a national security issue, where if you have these sort of societal divisions and polarization, it's something that our adversaries exploit, especially Russia. Russia uses this tactic of trying to inflame tensions and passions and blaming all problems on LGBT people and creating this sort of friction in society. And when they do that, it makes it more difficult for us to reach consensus on any issue, because we're divided and we're spending all this energy arguing over these things. And so countries that are inclusive, that deliver results for all the people that they represent, ultimately are more stable and they are able to resist this kind of malign influence from outside adversaries. And so we want our alliance to be resilient to these sorts of efforts to divide us and break us apart over issues that, exploiting fears and ignorance about LGBT people, whereas there might not have been a big problem before, but if they push all the propaganda and the hate and give you someone to blame for things you're worried about, then it turns it into something more damaging to our unity. And so we look at it from that perspective also. And that's not just an issue for Latvia, it's for anywhere in the alliance. It's true in the United States also. But it makes me sad when I see politicians in my country, politicians here, politicians in other NATO countries copying these tactics from Russia, using, weaponizing homophobia and trying to use it as a way to divide us.
So stupid, in my opinion, is that you're just creating pseudo problems to divert attention from real life issues and just keep, in Latvia again specifically, we've been talking about same-sex partnerships since 1990.
Yeah.
And okay, that makes a lot of sense now. Why Russia is homophobic. And we also get for instance, in the education law, I already mentioned we have the tikumības, the purity law clause, which is a softer copy-paste from Russia's anti-gay propaganda law. And it's just replicating the same thing and giving people something to fight over about.
The inequality is ammunition for them. It's a hook for them to keep going with the polarization and division. And it pulls you back from the trajectory that we're on as an EU member, as a NATO member. And that's what Russia would like to see happen. So hopefully they fail.
I remember the first prides in mid-2000s in Latvia. Not gonna lie, they were the majority of the attendees were diplomats or people from foreign countries. Why? Because it gave I back then personally believed, oh wow, they're bringing in gays from Norway or from the Netherlands. And it sort of feeds into the idea that it's brought in.
Yeah. There's probably different reasons for this. And, I can't say the U.S. is perfect in anything. But, one thing that I'm proud of that we've done as diplomats is we've been some of the more eager early participants in some of this activism in different countries around the world. And I can speak to a little bit more about the situation in Bulgaria.
Right.
I was there for the first Pride in 2012. And it was, a small group of activists and a bunch of diplomats. And there was no institutional support, no politicians, no, cultural figures, no businesses. And there were more police than there were participants in the Pride event. And then I went back to that Pride parade multiple years since, and it's now grown into this huge event, 10,000 plus people, a huge concert, all sorts of politicians and top celebrities and everybody going to it. Lots of straight people go to it because it's
a span of 10 years.
Yeah. It's really emerged. And so at the beginning, the speakers, they were the diplomats and they were saying, hey, we're with you, we're pushing, we support you. And now it's evolved to the point in Bulgaria where there's no time in the program for the diplomats. And that's the way it should be. It should eventually evolve to a situation that is, led and driven by the host country institutions and activists and people. I think diplomats, we have a little bit of an advantage in sort of joining these things when they're so unpopular at first. It's, we're not we're not business people trying to make a profit. We're not politicians trying to get elected.
Right.
We can't really be arrested.
Right.
And so there's a little bit of safety that we have. And if it plays a little bit of role in generating some attention and some support from the host country politicians and businesses, then I'm glad that we were able to do that. But eventually it needs to evolve into something that's really truly a locally driven thing.
Right. Oh, sounds so good.
Yeah. And I will say here, I think it largely is locally driven now at this point.
At this point, yeah.
That's certainly my impression.
Well, I still hope to see you in Pride this summer.
I'm going to be there. I'll be there for all of it, and we'll enjoy the party, and I'll watch the activists, do the hard work and give the important speeches. So. You
mentioned the case of Bulgaria. Were you, when you were a diplomat in all the other countries you mentioned, like Hungary, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan, did you also serve as a public affairs officer? Did you have to do the same things that you do here?
In Hungary and Bulgaria, it did. It was similar. In Ukraine, it was different. I was working in our consular section, and then in Kazakhstan, I was a political officer working on human rights issues.
Human rights. So did you have to deal with LGBTQIA things?
Normally, I would have. It was sort of in my portfolio, but at the time, there really were no LGBTQI organizations or activists, at least not that were known to us or open. This was 15 years ago. And also it wasn't a foreign policy priority for us in the same way that it is now. It just didn't get that kind of attention by as part of our foreign policy. So,
right. That's fair.
Yeah.
What are the tools available to you, to foster LGBTQIA equality in Latvia?
Well, the tools that we use for this issue, I would say, are similar to the tools that we use for any issue. I think the most fundamental one is the relationships that we build with the Latvian government, and we have very good relations. Latvia is truly a good ally, and so we talk and we meet, and we have a lot of common understandings on pretty important issues. And so because the equality for LGBTQI people is part of our foreign policy, we also talk about that. So this issue comes up in the meetings that we have with ministers and SIMA members and people, and we do express why we think it's important as a human rights issue and as a national security issue. And so those are sort of, behind the scenes conversations. We don't always broadcast that. We work, as diplomats quietly, and we advocate on the issues we think are important. And then more publicly, and this is what my team works on, is the more public advocacy. So, we have a small grants program where we give grants to groups that are interested in helping us advance foreign policy issues that usually involve some element of, American history, culture, policy, something. So we have that. We have exchange programs that we can send people on that help them build sort of advocacy, networking skills. We use our own messages publicly on social media or speaking to the press, kind of our strategic communications element, where we talk directly to Latvian people and try to explain why we believe what we believe, why we think it's important. And for the LGBT issue, we do that. We do that on a lot of occasions, but we always have a flag raising ceremony for the Pride Progress flag for the International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia in May. And then we always participate in the Pride events, and we fly the flag above our embassy, and the ambassador usually goes and marches in the parade along with a big group from the embassy just to vocally show our support for these events. And in the past, we've given grants to organizations like Mozaika and others to work on projects related to advocacy for the issue.
That's awesome. And has it been consistent over the past couple of decades, or does it change administration by administration? For instance, during Trump times, you mentioned the flag raising. I don't know if you can share anything, but I remember that there was some drama about the flag next to the U.S. Embassy.
Yeah, there are changes. It's in terms of the level of priority that different administrations give to different issues. Most of our foreign policy stays fundamentally very similar, especially in sort of the NATO world. But with the Trump administration, there were a lot of changes. And that's one of sometimes the challenges for us as diplomats in our system. We're nonpartisan diplomats, and we serve whatever administration has been elected. And so overnight, you change to a very different set of policies that you have to represent. And so the Trump administration did not prioritize this issue as much, that we still had some freedom to be active. We still went to pride events and supported pride parades and gave grants and things like that. But they were a little bit more cautious about the flag raising and didn't want us wanted to make sure it wasn't on the same flagpole as the American flag, which is a normal protocol issue. And that's still the case now. And then there were a number of people that President Trump appointed as ambassador who did not want to fly the pride flag at their embassy. And so that was also part of the issue. Yeah.
You sort of started talking about some exchange programs as a tool for people to experience some of the things and network. What are the recurring exchange programs that me as an individual could apply through the U.S. Embassy?
Yeah, good. Thanks for asking about that.
Some free advertising.
Yes. All of you, please apply. No, we do have, I think, some pretty good programs that usually get really positive reviews from people when they come back. And sometimes there's not a lot of candidates for them. And so I think I would encourage people to look at them and which ones might be a good fit. And there's information about them on our embassy website, and we always, when there's a start date for recruiting for them, we always post that on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram for our embassy websites. But there's some programs for high school. There's a Flex exchange program, which is a year-long exchange in the United States. There's something called the Benjamin Franklin Transatlantic Fellowship, which is kind of a little bit more of a policy-oriented summer exchange program for a high school age student. And at the college level, we have Fulbright exchanges for graduate students. And then we have something called the Study of the United States Institutes program for student leaders who can apply to go to the United States for a period of time and sort of a professional exchange development with American counterparts. And then for people who may have graduated already, there's also some programs. There's something called the Community Solutions Program, which is kind of civic engagement, civic activism type training and mentorship program. And all of these programs, in addition to, to building skills, I think it makes the connection between our countries stronger. The Latvians who go to the U.S., they're talking and sharing experiences about Latvia and educating Americans about Latvia, and then vice versa. And then when you come back, and me as a diplomat here, there's just a more natural connection between us because you've been to our country, you kind of understand.
I understand how crazy y'all are.
Yeah, you might not like it all, but at least you have an idea of why we are the way we are, and it makes it easier to work together. And I think that's pretty important when you're allies to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. As I mentioned, I'm the biggest advocate about living in the States, at least for a while. Like it or not, I think everyone has to go through that. If you don't have the means, there are, as Richard said, many opportunities. Just prove yourself to be an awesome human being, and I think all the doors are open.
It's good. You're good to be optimistic and at least explore and try these things. So, yeah.
Exactly. I will compile all of these things and put them in the press release that's attached to this episode, so everyone who's interested can check it out. And also
please apply. Follow us on social media to see when the applications are starting.
How can we find U.S. Embassy on social media?
I think it's under U.S. Embassy Riga on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Mr. Public Affairs Officer.
Yes. I haven't memorized the URL or the exact address, but it's not hard to find. So.
Can I actually? I do remember. Early university years, I tried applying for an internship in the U.S. Embassy. Didn't get it. But is there just out of curiosity, you mentioned that the State Department generally is very there are many policies to be more inclusive. Is there a quota system for gay people?
No, there's no quota system.
So it's all merit.
Yeah.
Fine.
But compete on the merits and...
exactly.
It may work out.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. One question that I usually ask our guests, how can our viewers and listeners support the ideals and values that you support?
That's a good question. And as a diplomat in another country, I'm always sort of a little bit sensitive of telling people, what to believe or how to do something. But, I think I'm pretty comfortable saying that this idea of civic involvement is critical to all of us, to Latvia, to the United States, to the country, that if we don't continue fighting for the freedoms and the things that we've had or that our parents have earned, over a lot of hardship, if we don't continue fighting for them, we're going to lose them. And I'm feeling that in the United States. There's a lot of polarization. There's a lot of crazy things happening in our political system, and it requires people to stand up, to vote, to speak out, to get involved, to join organizations. Because if we sit back and don't tend to this society that we have, we're gonna lose the freedoms that we have. And so that's the key message, I think, really is to be involved. And so on this issue, you've got great organizations here, Safe Space, Mosaika, a number of others. There's cultural organizations like the Baltic Drag Kings Collective. There's cultural venues like Scapus. There's all sorts of things happening here. I'm excited for the community here and what's the momentum that's currently happening in Latvia. And I think there's lots of ways to be part of this momentum.
Yeah, that sounded so nice. It sort of reminded me.
Maybe easier to say than to actually do.
Yeah, but who was it? Was it Winston Churchill who said that democracy is the worst form of a government besides everything else that's been tried?
Yes.
So yeah, you have to take care of democracy and actually take part and be active, because someone may take away your neighbor's rights. You won't care.
Right.
Then they'll take away your rights.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. And if you don't speak out and guard the sorts of things that are essential to how we live, then you might lose them.
All right. That's the thesis of Ričards Damstra. Richard, before you have a couple of months left in Latvia, what are some of the things you want to experience while still here?
Yes. Well, we've got a lot of good things planned. Of course, going to go to Pride and enjoy all of that. I'm going to go to Lampa Festival again, the Song and Dance Festival. I'm hoping to get tickets, fingers crossed.
We all do.
Yes. Go to that. Positivus, going to that.
To Positive. Wow.
Yeah. And then we're gonna go to the countryside again for Jāņus and celebrate there.
Is that going to be your vacation already? Are you is your mission over June 1st?
No. These are all happening on weekends and
right.
And then I'm hoping there's some more silent discos at Tallinas Kvartāls. That's always one of our favorite things.
Yeah.
And I want to go. I've been to Liepāja and really enjoyed it. I want to take my husband there before we leave so he can see it too.
Aww.
So lots to do before we
find
leave
some amber.
July. Yes, hopefully. Yes.
Thank you so much for stopping by today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for your beautiful English, by the way. I wish my Latvian had blossomed more and I could do this all in Latvian, but I'm grateful that you and so many people speak such beautiful English here.
Trying our best. Thanks to the TV sitcom known as Friends. Thank you, Richard. And I hope we didn't expose any secrets today.
I hope not either, but we're going to delete those in editing. So, yeah.
Okay, everyone, thank you for being with us today. Thank you, Active Citizens Fund, for making this podcast a possibility. And thanks to all the donors and everyone who's donated, because y'all been crazy. The uptick in donations has been very rewarding, and I'm very, Yev and I were very, very, very grateful. We are approaching the end of season 1 of Propaganda, but there's going to be a season 2. Let me just tell you that. All right. Have a good day, everyone, and see you. Bye.